Welcome to Sarasa Story Time. 今日はシンデレラのお話を読むよ。シンデレラが来てくれるはずなんだけど。シンデレラ、どこにいる？あ、いた。ピプティパプティプー。わあ、綺麗なドレス。魔法使いさん、ありがとう。なんて可愛い女の子なんだ。僕と一緒に踊ってください。もちろん、喜んで。ゴーン、ゴーン。あ、12時だ。もう行かなきゃ。さようなら。待って、僕は君の名前も知らないよ。あ、私のカツラが。でも時間がない。あの可愛い女の子がカツラだった。よし、みんなであの子を探そう。Let's get started. Cinderella. Once upon a time, a wealthy widower lived in a fine house with his daughter Cinderella. He loved his daughter very much. Still, he felt Cinderella should have a mother's care, so he married a woman with two young daughters who were just about Cinderella's age. Sadly, the gentleman died soon after, and Cinderella discovered that her stepmother was a cold and cruel woman. As the years passed, Cinderella's stepmother spoiled her two daughters. Anastasia and Drizella slept in large, lovely bedrooms, but Cinderella was given a tiny room in the attic. And while her stepsisters lived like princesses, poor Cinderella was forced to do laundry, serve meals, and clean house. Still, Cinderella remained kind and gentle. All the animals loved her. The birds sang to her, and the mice were always there to keep her company. She made tiny clothes for them and often rescued them from the claws of her stepmother's nasty cat, Lucifer. Early one morning, Cinderella sat at the window in her tiny room and stared out at the castle in the distance. She dreamed of one day wearing a beautiful gown and dancing at a fancy ball. Someday my dreams will come true, Cinderella said to herself. Meanwhile, the king wanted his son to marry right away, but the prince wanted to wait for the girl of his dreams. The king had an idea. He told the Grand Duke they would have a ball and invite all the young women in the kingdom. The invitations were delivered that very day. Cinderella took the invitation from a messenger and handed it to her stepmother. As their mother read the invitation aloud, Anastasia and Drizella jumped with excitement. Cinderella asked if she could go too. You may go, said her stepmother sternly, if you finish all your chores and find something suitable to wear. Cinderella ran to her room and found an old ball gown. Maybe it's a little old-fashioned, but I'll fix that, she thought, looking at her pattern book. But first she had chores to do, and they seemed never to end. It was 8 o'clock at night when Cinderella completed her last chore, too late to finish her ball gown. But as she entered her room, there hung her ball gown, finished to look like the one in the pattern book. The birds and mice had done all the sewing. Oh, thank you so much, Cinderella said. Cinderella dressed and hurried downstairs to join her stepsisters. But when they saw what she wore, a sash and beads that had once belonged to them, Anastasia and Drizella ripped the gown to shreds. Sobbing, Cinderella ran into the garden. "It's no use," she cried. She thought her dreams would never come true. Suddenly, the garden filled with light, and Cinderella looked up to see her fairy godmother. With a wave of her wand, the fairy godmother turned a pumpkin into a glittering coach, and the mice into horses. She waved her wand again and changed the horse into a coachman, and Bruno the dog into a footman. Last of all, she transformed Cinderella's rags into a lovely ball gown and put glass slippers on her tiny feet. Cinderella twirled around in her beautiful new gown. "It's like a dream," she said with a sigh. "Yes, my child, but you'll only have till midnight," cautioned her fairy godmother. "On the stroke of 12, the spell will be broken, and everything will be as it was before." At the ball, the prince rushed over and asked Cinderella to dance. Cinderella smiled and took his hand, never guessing that he was the prince. They danced all night, and anyone could see that they were falling in love. Suddenly, the clock began to strike 12. "Oh dear, it's midnight. I must leave," said Cinderella, breaking away from the prince. "Wait, I don't even know your name. How will I find you?" called the prince. The Grand Duke ran after Cinderella. He knew the prince had finally found the girl he wanted to marry, and the king would be furious if she got away. Racing down the stairs, Cinderella lost a glass slipper. The Grand Duke, a few steps behind, stopped to pick it up. When he looked around a moment later, she was gone. Just beyond the palace gates, at the stroke of midnight, the spell was broken. Just as the fairy godmother had said, all was as it had been before. All that is, except for the tiny glass slipper on Cinderella's foot. She took the slipper off and carried it home. The next day, the king was frantic. "The prince is determined to marry none but the girl who fits this slipper," the Grand Duke told him. Cinderella's stepmother decided that Cinderella must not have the chance to try on the slipper. She quickly locked the girl in her room. But Cinderella wasn't locked in for long. The mice stole the key, carried it upstairs, and slipped it under Cinderella's door. Anastasia and Drizella tried to force their big feet into the tiny slipper, but it was no use. Then, just as the Grand Duke was about to leave, Cinderella appeared at the top of the stairs. "May I try it on?" she asked. The footman carried the slipper towards Cinderella, but her stepmother stuck out her cane and tripped him. The glass slipper crashed down onto the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The Grand Duke was horrified. "But I have the other slipper," Cinderella said with a smile, pulling the glass slipper from under her apron. The glass slipper slid onto Cinderella's foot. It was a perfect fit. Soon, Cinderella and the prince were married, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Oshimai. Hi again. Did you enjoy the story? お話楽しかったですか？次はラプンツェルを読みます。英語でラプンツェルは天国で読みます。またねー。